Today's video is sponsored by Skillshare. Stay tuned to hear more about all that Skillshare has to offer. Hey there, welcome to PencilStash. I'm Rachel, and I have been a fan of watercolors for a very long time now. I think that their soft, kind of watery appearance is just so lovely, and I've delved into trying them for myself a bit here and there, but I've finally decided to take the plunge, and I bought myself a set of Windsor Newton Cotman watercolors. There's 45 half pans in here, and I cannot wait to open this and see what they look like. Now, for some context, do you guys know how long colored pencil coloring typically takes me? Anywhere from like 6 to 12 hours to color a really good one. Many, many more hours if I'm also watching Netflix or YouTube while I'm coloring. So another aspect of watercolor that appeals to me is time. These can cover areas in such a lovely way in a fraction of the time that it takes me with my pencils. So in certain circumstances, that might be a huge benefit. And I just want to point out that on the back of the box, it specifically says products shown, not actual size, which is hysterical. Now, as I open this, I'm already liking this white kind of plastic case that it comes in. It's very sturdy. It feels like really good quality. And I do believe that these panels kind of open up into usable paint palettes. Can we just have a moment to just kind of stop and appreciate how beautiful this looks? I did not know that they were going to come kind of individually wrapped like this. This is wrapped up pretty good here. And by the way, I am loving some of the colors that these come in. You can get a little bit of a glimpse of them on some of the wrappers here. They look vibrant, and it looks like there will be a lot of variety to choose from. And I'm really looking forward to trying these if I could actually unwrap them. This is kind of embarrassing. They're wrapped up pretty tight. Whew, all right, I got one open. So each pan is this little square of white plastic. And then the watercolor paint is kind of solidified within the pan. And it also has all the color info here written on the side. And what I like about this is that since these little pans are removable, they're also movable. You can actually move these around to whatever order or orientation actually works best for you in the overall kind of white palette here. And I could be wrong, but I do believe that you can replace these individual pans too. Like if you run out of certain colors or, some of them get kind of mixed or kind of yucky, I do believe that you can reorder or just purchase individual colors too. Don't hold me to it, but I think you can. Now, these little wrapped white squares, these pans, they kind of remind me of something. I cannot put my finger on it. It's kind of driving me crazy. Is it gum? Maybe from like the 80s or the 90s, I want to say. Wasn't there some kind of gum that was wrapped like this, maybe like two pieces that were kind of wrapped together? If anyone knows, please put it down in the comments for me. All right, let's get all these open. I'm dying to see them. And this is going to take a while, and I'm going to spare you guys the agony of watching me struggle. So I'll be back in a minute. Moving on. Here are all of my unwrapped watercolors, and I've grabbed some water, paper towel, paintbrush, and I want to start by swatching these colors because I don't remember what any of these are. As you can see, a lot of them look exactly the same, and they are written on the side of each of the pan, but who wants to grab wet pans every time you want to know what one of these colors is? So, and this one here, this one doesn't even have the color info on it like the other one did. See how this one says burnt umber? This one says nothing at all. So I don't know, your guess is as good as mine. So in order to keep these straight, I'm going to swatch them. And I've got some Canston watercolor paper here, and this is a very large size, so I'd like to cut this down a little bit. So the first thing I'm going to do is just use my ruler, and I'm just going to create 45 little rectangles here. This doesn't have to be perfect, just kind of gives you just a little bit of an indicator of what each of these colors are. So I've got 45 little rectangles here. I'm going to cut away the excess so I have a smaller swatch or smaller color chart. And now all I have to do is get some water on my brush, get the pan wet, and then swatch the right pan into the right square so that they're all in order, just so that I'll be able to kind of quickly identify what each of these colors is at a glance. So as long as my little paint pans kind of stay in the same order, I'll be okay. So a couple of general comments as I go through and swatch these. Right off the bat, they're going on really nice and smooth. There's no chalkiness, there's no grit. They are like butter. And I'm already really excited to use these on a coloring page. And second, these colors are so pretty and so vibrant. Look at how beautiful some of these like corally colors, some of the more like berry purples are. There's a beautiful muted green that is absolutely calling my name. So fun, really excited to use these. Wait a minute. I think I messed up. I'm missing one. How did I even do that? All of these pans are wet. How is it possible that I missed one? Oh God. Okay, it's all good. No worries. No worries, doesn't matter. I'll figure it out. And when I do, I will just move that pan to the end of the row in the paint palette, and then I'll swatch it at the end of my chart too. So no harm, no foul. Okay, you tuned into a coloring channel, and 6.5 minutes in, I have yet to color. So now is that time. I'm going to be using a page from my Alice in Wonderland coloring book, and I chose this book for a few reasons. One, the paper is nice and thick, so I thought it would be a good test to see if it stands up to using water on it. And two, there are pages in here that are relatively simple, lots of open area, so good test pages just to see how I like using watercolor on coloring books, and also good practice for me. And I'll be tearing out this page from my book just to keep water from seeping through to the other pages. And I don't typically like removing pages from my book, but this isn't like a book that I planned on completing or, doing anything special with, so not a big deal. I am also going to use the rest of my color chart page as a scrap piece for testing out my colors and combinations, and to get the right saturation of color on my brush before I put it onto our page. And to start, I'd like to use some of the greens that I was eyeing while swatching them out. They're so lovely, and I'd like to see what we can do within this rose bush. This is by far my favorite part of the page here, and I have some ideas on how we might be able to make it special. While the lighter green is still wet, I'm going to add in a bit of this darker green into some of these new leaves, and also a bit into ones that already had that lighter green, and then leave some of the areas that just had the lighter green alone. Now, this will create some color variation in 3 ways instead of just 2. And for now, I'm just focusing on the leaves themselves for the most part. There's obviously some interior space and some other areas that we're going to address as well, but I'm starting out conservatively until I kind of get my feet under me, and then we'll get more into it. Now, one thing I do want to say is that the ink on this coloring page is holding up so well to this water. It isn't smearing or making any of my colors muddy. It's staying put, so definitely 2 thumbs up, I think, on using this coloring book for some watercolor. Oh, and I know a lot of people usually like to tape down the page when they're using watercolor. It'll help the page from buckling and whatnot. I like to move my page around quite a bit and like turn it and get good angles, and so I've never been one to tape down my edges, but I probably should, and you certainly can too, but I like to just kind of keep it flexible. All right, we need to paint some of these roses red. That's the reason that these guys are out here with paintbrushes, so let's give it a try. And right off the bat, I think my brush has too much water on it. That's why they're showing up so light. So let's let the roses area dry just a little bit and we'll come back to it. But in the meantime, let's get a bit of a drier brush, still wet, but drier than before. And we'll add a bit more red and we can get a much darker, deeper color on the ends of their paintbrushes. Now, this is much more the red that I was going for. Now on the cards' hoods and shoes, I wanted to experiment with using a combination of the dark indigo blue that we have in our palette. I think it's so pretty, and the dark sort of charcoal gray. I love the way that these two colors blend together naturally in some places, but also don't blend in other places. Now with colored pencils, that would drive me crazy, but with watercolor, it's such a nice look and one that I'm very happy to embrace. I'm also purposefully not being too careful to stay inside the lines too much. I actually kind of like the splotchy watercolor look where it's like drifting kind of outside of the line art. So I'm testing out where this looks good and where it looks sloppy. I'm sure there's a very fine line in between. No pun intended. I also can't resist trying out some of these coral colors. They are calling my name, they're beautiful, and this is my test page, so I can do what I want. Now let's see what we can do on the ground area down here. Now I think it might be nice to put in some browns kind of underfoot and then have some green space on the top and on the bottom, almost like they're standing on a pathway. So we'll give that a try. And in hindsight, I wish that I had kept this a little bit more minimal and played with its overall starting and kind of stopping shape a little bit. I went a bit too rectangular and it was too late to course correct by the time I kind of realized it, but definitely something that I'd like to continue to be a bit more intentional with and just get better at. My color doesn't always have to go edge to edge or be so predictable. I can play with shapes and the color in a little bit of a different way. So definitely something that I'd like to continue getting better at. All right, this is where it went off the rails just a little bit for me, nothing crazy, but I just wasn't sure how to transition from the brown of the pathway into the green. The artist didn't delineate anything here with the line art, and there's such a contrast between the brown and the green. I was a little nervous kind of butting them up right against each other. And these are the moments that I wish I did digital art. You could hit the undo button and try something different without having to go back and redo other parts of your page. But alas, no undo button here, so I did my best, but I do wish that I had approached it a little bit differently. And the more I tried, the more rectangular it got, so my bad. When I'm struggling on an area of a page, I do find it best to kind of leave it alone for a little bit, just let it lie, move on to a different spot, and meanwhile give it some thought and then come back to it later. So I did just that. I went back up into the rosebush canopy and I began to just sort of fill in some of those areas where it might be a little bit more dense and add a little bit more color. And this is my favorite part of the page. This is where I started to play outside of the lines a little bit, literally. I wanted to experiment and see what would happen if I brought some of my greens outside of the lines of the leaves and just to kind of give the illusion of some additional leaves. And I really, really like the way that this came out. I think it really added, I don't know, just a little bit of that kind of special aspect that I was really going for. And for the faces of our cards, I knew I was going to have to play with layering some colors to get a skin tone that I was happy with. So I started light and I gave the faces just kind of an overall wash. Then I tried to layer in additional color while it was still wet, and I wasn't quite achieving what I wanted. So I moved on just to give this area some time to dry and come back to it later. Now this little background piece with this kind of bush here, once it had dried, it had a very distinctive line between the two sort of color areas, and I wanted to soften that just a little bit. So the beauty of watercolor is that I was able to just get my brush just like slightly wet, no paint on it, and I was able to reactivate the watercolor here and just soften this area a little bit, give it a bit more of an organic sort of shape. Let's add in another layer of red to our roses. I really wanted these to pop. And I wanted to bring in some additional color here into the canopy, maybe some ochres and some corals to match the coral that I put on the bird. So we're going to add a little bit of this on the paint pails, one here at the bottom and the other one here in the hand of one of the cards. And I'm also adding it a little bit into the canopy of the bush, just a couple little dots like here and there, soften it a little bit with water, just for some more visual interest and a little bit of color variation. All right, our faces are dry, so now we can go back in with some darker color to build in some variation. Really concentrating this kind of on the cheek area and the jawline area, just to add a little bit of dimension. Now, I really like these kind of floating areas of color like I did on the rose bush. So let's see what that would look like if we maybe added in some sky with a really watered down blue color. And this is very subtle, but I like it. I was able to keep it small and just kind of play with its shape a little bit. And you know what? I think we're good here. This was a really fun test page. We got to try out our watercolors, practice with those a little bit, see how our paper held up, which I have to say, I am quite happy with. This book held up really, really nicely. And just kind of overall, I'm really happy with the upper kind of 2/3 of this page. The bottom area, totally fine, but I do wish that I had maybe approached it just a little bit differently, but definitely a good lesson learned. And if you guys are interested in seeing me do more with watercolor on coloring pages, let me know down in the comments. And also, I'm sure that some of you are quite familiar with watercolor. Feel free to tell me all the things I did wrong on this page, as I'm sure that that bucket is plentiful. And real quick, I do want to thank Skillshare for sponsoring this video. Without the help of our sponsors, this channel would not be what it is today, so thank you, Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning community for creators with thousands of classes in design, art, business, so much more. If you want to improve your knowledge on any topic, Skillshare has a class for you. Like this class, Ink and Watercolor by Yasmina Creates. This is the class that I took to get familiar with this medium and really build my confidence as I began to put brush to paper. She masterfully works watercolor into her inked art, so I knew that adding it to our coloring pages would be a match made in heaven. Now, premium membership gives you unlimited access to classes, communities, and workshops that are just right for you and your learning goals. So join the millions of students already learning on Skillshare today with a special offer just for PencilStash viewers. The first 1,000 viewers to click the link below in the description will get a free trial of premium Skillshare membership. Now, after your free trial, Skillshare is super affordable, with an annual subscription being less than $10 per month. And with all the growth potential that these classes have to offer, that is a fantastic investment in yourself and your personal development. Act now for this special offer and start learning with Skillshare today. And that is it for me today, guys. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. If you enjoyed this video and want to help the channel out, hit the thumbs up button and I will see you all later. Don't forget to check out my Etsy shop if you're a Disney fan, and happy coloring.